Have you ever been called a living doll? Someone who just stands there and looks pretty while other people make fun of you. Today, I'm going to tell you about a soldier who was called exactly that. One act of cruelty showed that he was a hero that nobody saw coming. On Tuesday, August 2024, it was very hot in London. The heat waves made the cobblestones of Horse Guards Parade shine, and tourists gathered in any shade they could find. The deep bronze notes of Big Ben's chimes rang out across the historic square, where centuries of British military tradition lived and breathed. Marcus Webb, a 25-year-old guard, stood at attention in his red tunic and shiny brass buttons. His breathing had become as steady as the ticking of a clock. His heavy wool uniform made him sweat, but he kept his face straight and his eyes straight ahead. His partner, a beautiful black horse named Storm, stood next to him. Storm was more than just a ceremonial horse. His coat shone like polished obsidian in the afternoon sun, and his eyes had a look of intelligence that was almost human. His ears would twitch and turn every few seconds, scanning the crowd with the accuracy of radar. He breathed in a controlled, measured, and professional way. But if you looked really closely, you might see a thin black ribbon woven into his mane. It was hard to see unless you knew what to look for. The tourists were normal for a Tuesday. Families with kids who couldn't sit still, older couples with cameras, and groups of young people who were more interested in their phones than the ceremony going on in front of them. People were whispering things like, "Are they real? Do they ever move? And how long do they have to stand there?" Jake Morrison showed up next. Jake was everything that modern social media had made him: loud, entitled, and armed with a smartphone and 2.3 million TikTok followers. His bleached hair shone in the sun as he walked into the square, and the designer sneakers he was wearing squeaked against the old stones. He had a smirk on his face that made it seem like he thought the whole world was funny. He wore a tank top that showed off his gym-sculpted arms. "Oh, this is perfect," Jake said to the camera on his phone, which was already recording. "Look at these human mannequins. Are they real soldiers or just expensive props that the government keeps around for tourists?" Some people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, but Jake was just getting started. He went around Marcus and Storm like a predator, taking pictures from every angle with his phone. Seriously, what's the point? It's 2024, people. We have drones and satellites, but Britain is still dressing up like toy soldiers and their pets. Marcus couldn't do anything. Protocol called for complete silence and stillness. He clenched his jaw almost without realizing it, as he thought about his mother lying in her hospital bed, the medical bills that made this job necessary, and how proud she was when he told her he protected the Queen's horses. But Storm heard everything. His ears perked up when he heard Jake's voice, and something dangerous flashed in his dark eyes. Jake laughed, happy that more and more people were watching him live. 15,000 viewers and counting. They love this content. He moved closer to Storm, so close that his cologne mixed with the horse's natural smell. "Are you ready for your close-up, horsey?" Storm's nostrils flared, and his whole body stiffened at that moment. Marcus could tell something was wrong right away by the small change in his partner's posture. Very wrong. Jake Morrison, who is very good at social media, and thinks he's better than everyone else, missed one important thing. That black ribbon in Storm's mane is thin. It wasn't for show. It was a medal. That ribbon wasn't just a piece of cloth. The horse wore a service commendation that he had earned through blood and sacrifice. He had seen things that would break most men. But Jake Morrison, who was drunk on his own online fame and the rush of having 15,000 live viewers, was about to cross a line that would change everything. "Guys, this is crazy," Jake said, his voice shaking with excitement as he held his phone up to Storm's face. He couldn't read all the comments that were coming in quickly enough. User British Pride 88 says, show some respect! Oh come on, Karen, it's just entertainment. He laughed, the hollow sound that social media stars make when they think being mean is funny. Storm's ears began to flatten against his head, which was a subtle warning that Marcus felt right away through the reins. The horse's breathing changed from a steady, ceremonial beat to something deeper and more controlled. It was the way a soldier breathes, before going into battle. Look at this, Jake said again, circling them like a shark that smells blood in the water. The horse is probably thinking about what horses think about, grass and hay, and maybe when his next Instagram photo shoot will be. The crowd around them had grown larger because of the show. Some tourists looked uncomfortable as they shifted their weight from foot to foot, but others took out their phones to record the drama that was happening. Marcus's jaw got even tighter. He thought about his mother, Catherine Webb, who was in a hospital bed in East London fighting cancer that was slowly taking her away. The chemotherapy treatments cost more than his father ever made in the factories. This job, standing guard at Horse Guards Parade, wasn't very exciting, but it paid enough to keep their medical bills from completely ruining them. Marcus, you're protecting something important, his mother said. The crown, the tradition, the history. Stand tall, my boy. But Storm was thinking about something else. His muscles tensed under his ceremonial tack as memories from a different time came rushing back. The strong smell of explosives. The sound of sirens, screaming. The weight of his fallen rider, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, whose blood had soaked into his mane during those terrible 40 minutes in Paris. The ribbon wasn't just for show, it was a purple heart for military animals that were hurt in battle. Wow, this is perfect. Jake's voice cut through Storm's memories like a knife. 22,000 viewers now. We're going viral, people. He got closer, close enough for Storm to smell the designer cologne and something else that made the horse's nostrils flare with recognition. A German tourist, an elderly man with kind eyes and a walking stick, came up to the scene. Entschuldigung, he said, his English very strong but with a strong accent. Maybe you should show some respect. These soldiers are fighting for their country. Jake turned around, and his phone was still streaming. Calm down, Grandpa. It's 2024, not 1944. These guys are basically expensive props that the government keeps around for tourists like you. Look. He pointed at Marcus and Storm with his hands. They can't even move. What kind of soldier can't protect himself? That's when Storm's head turned. Just a little bit, just enough for his dark eyes to see Jake's face. There was something in that look that made the influencer's confident smile fade for a moment. It was the look of a soldier who had been in real combat, seen friends die, and had scars that were both visible and hidden. Marcus could feel it right away. Storm's change in posture meant that his partner was no longer just standing at attention. He was judging a threat. But neither Marcus nor Jake saw the beautiful woman in the designer coat who had just come to the edge of the crowd. She wasn't looking at the show, she was looking at the small black ribbon woven into Storm's mane. Rebecca Cross was there, and she knew exactly what she was looking at. The real story was about to start. The sound of designer heels on old cobblestones cut through the summer heat like a knife. Rebecca Cross moved through the crowd with the smooth grace of someone who is used to dealing with power. Her tailored navy coat was spotless, even though it was a hot afternoon in London. At 40, she had the kind of polished elegance that got her into BBC boardrooms and government offices. Her silver hair was pulled back into a flawless chignon that stayed in place despite the humidity. But it wasn't how she looked that made Storm's whole body stiffen. It was acknowledgement. Rebecca said, fascinating, in a voice that had that unique BBC polish that could make even the most boring comment sound important. She walked up to the ceremonial pair with the self-assurance of someone who belonged wherever they went. "Shadow Protocol, if I'm not mistaken." The words hit Marcus like a punch in the gut. He could feel Storm's muscles tense up under him, and the horse's whole body became aware in a way that went far beyond ceremonial duty. Rebecca's eyes were drawn to the black ribbon woven into Storm's mane like a magnet, and she looked at it with professional interest. Jake Morrison, who was still streaming to 25,000 people, felt a change in the mood. "What's this? Some fancy lady thinks she knows about horses." He turned his phone toward Rebecca, who was always looking for something to read. "Mom, would you like to tell us more about these government props?" Rebecca's smile was sharp and didn't reach her eyes. "These aren't props, young man. This horse is very special." She moved closer to Storm, close enough that Marcus could smell her expensive perfume mixed with something else, something sharp and metallic that made Storm's nostrils flare with alarm. "I'm Rebecca Cross, an investigative journalist for The Guardian. I've been looking into military animal programs." Her voice was smooth and steady, and every word was carefully chosen. "I think Shadow Protocol was Britain's most secret animal intelligence unit. It was disbanded after something happened in Paris." Storm's breathing changed in a big way. It was no longer the steady rhythm of ceremonial duty, it was now the controlled, shallow pattern of an animal getting ready to fight or run away. His ears pressed against his head as memories came rushing back, the smell of explosives, the screaming sirens, and the weight of Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell's body as she fell from his back, her blood soaking into his mane. Marcus could feel every tremor and small change in his partner's posture, but he didn't know what was going on. Protocol said to be quiet, but Storm was trying to say something important, something urgent. The horse's head turned a little, and its dark eyes were fixed on Rebecca with such intensity that a few tourists stepped back without thinking. Rebecca kept talking about how beautiful the animals were as she took out what looked like a regular smartphone. "Is it okay if I take a few pictures? For the article, of course. Our readers are very interested in how old and new security systems work together." Storm saw something that Marcus couldn't when she raised the device. It wasn't just a camera. The small changes, the extra sensors, and the way her fingers moved over controls that shouldn't be on a regular phone. She was taking pictures of something secret, something that only someone who knew what to look for could see. Marcus's spine was wet with a bead of sweat that had nothing to do with the heat. Storm's anger was getting too much to ignore, and the crowd was starting to notice. Tourists whispered to each other and pointed at the beautiful horse, which looked like it was about to lose its cool. Then Colonel James Hughes showed up at the edge of the square. His weathered face looked over the crowd with the trained eye of a career military officer. When he looked at Storm and saw the small black ribbon and knew what it meant, his face went from casual supervision to something like shock. Rebecca saw it right away. She put her phone down, but not before taking one last picture of a senior officer's face when he realized what was going on. "Well," she said softly, and there was a hint of satisfaction in her voice that made Storm's ears pin flat against his head. "This article is going to be very interesting." Colonel James Hughes had worked for the Queen for 37 years, during wars in the Balkans, Iraq, and Afghanistan. His face was weathered from seeing the worst of war, and his steel-grey eyes had seen bravery in ways that most civilians would never understand. But nothing could have gotten him ready for this moment. He was standing in Horse Guards parade on a hot August afternoon, staring at a horse that shouldn't exist. Most people couldn't see the thin black ribbon woven into Storm's mane, but to Hughes, it was like a neon sign. Recognition hit him like a physical blow, and his breath caught in his throat. Shadow Protocol. The most secret military animal program in British history. The plan was to bury it so deep that even the files would be burned. Jesus Christ, Hughes whispered, his Scottish accent getting thicker as he got more shocked. The tourists around him kept talking as if nothing was wrong, not realizing that they were looking at one of Britain's most decorated war animals. After Paris, Shadow Protocol was no more. Storm's ears turned toward the colonel's voice, and their eyes met in the middle of the busy square. At that moment, Hughes saw something that made his heart race with pride and deep sadness. The horse's dark eyes had the same haunted look that he had seen in too many soldiers who had come back from war. They had the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen the unthinkable and carried those memories like shrapnel in their soul. Rebecca Cross got closer, and the sound of her expensive heels clicking against the cobblestones was like a predator. "Shadow Protocol," she said again, enjoying the sound of the words like fine wine. "That's an interesting name for a military program. Would you like to tell me more, Colonel?" Hughes felt the blood leave his face. This woman knew way too much, and the fact that she was here today asking these specific questions made every alarm bell in his military-trained mind go off at full volume. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I don't understand what you're saying." But Storm was remembering. The memories came rushing back like a dam breaking down all of his carefully built emotional walls. November 2019 in Paris. The area around the Louvre. "Easy, Storm. I need you to find it. Lives depend on this." Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell's voice was calm and professional, even though things were going crazy around them. The smell had been faint, almost hidden by the pollution in the city and the fear of people running away. But Storm's nose, which had been trained for months in a very intense way, had picked up the chemical signature of Semtex explosive. As sirens wailed in the distance and automatic gunfire echoed from the buildings around him, his hooves thundered across the cobblestones of the Rue de Rivoli. He had found the thing. A timer that counts down with mechanical accuracy is hidden under a parked car. 47 seconds. Not enough time to call for help or for the bomb squad to get there. Lieutenant Mitchell made the choice that saved 300 lives. She disarmed the bomb by hand, knowing that the backup trigger would go off if she made even the smallest mistake. The explosion that came after wasn't because she had done well. It had come from the second device, which was hidden 50 yards away, and none of them had noticed until it was too late. The explosion sent Storm crashing into a stone wall, and as his rider fell, her blood soaked into his mane. At that moment, 3 British spies and 1 French diplomat had died. Storm had lived, but the mental scars were worse than any physical injury. Hughes saw the beautiful horse start to shake, and its breathing got faster and shallower. The colonel knew right away what was going on, a flashback, a PTSD episode, the kind of mental breakdown that could happen to any soldier who had seen too much and lost too much. "This horse," Hughes said quietly, his voice heavy with secrets and grief that had been hidden for too long, "saved more lives than we'll ever be able to admit. He found explosives that our best technology missed. He served with honor in situations that would break most men." Marcus could feel every tremor that ran through Storm's strong body and every small change in posture that showed how much emotional pain he was in. He finally understood what he was looking at for the first time since they had been working together. This wasn't just a ceremonial horse that tourists could ride. This was a warrior who had invisible wounds, from a secret war that the public would never know had happened in their name. Rebecca Cross listened to every word with the same intense focus as a predator studying its prey. Her digital recorder picked up details that could be worth millions to the right buyers. People in that square were about to find out how dangerous it was to know the truth about Storm. The Victoria Line platform, that was no longer in use, hadn't had any passengers since 1994. The walls were covered in grime and graffiti from years of use. Water dripped steadily from rusted pipes overhead, making a strange sound that echoed through the forgotten tunnels under London. Marcus sat on a broken bench, his red uniform ripped and dirty from their desperate escape. Storm stood nearby, his beautiful black coat covered in dust, but his eyes still alert and watching. Marcus felt like he had been hit in the face with the truth of their situation. Rebecca Cross wasn't just a bad journalist, she had ties to the highest levels of British intelligence. When he tried to call the emergency services from a payphone near Westminster Bridge, the operator put him on hold and then connected him to someone who asked very specific questions about his mental state, and told him to go to the nearest hospital for evaluation. They were cutting him off and isolating him so that if he ever tried to tell anyone about the conspiracy, he would sound like just another soldier who had been through a lot and was having a breakdown. Marcus whispered to Storm, his voice echoing in the dark underground. "They've thought of everything. Rebecca has people everywhere, police, intelligence agencies, and probably even the military. Who can we trust?" Storm's ears turned toward the sound of rumbling in the distance. It was the Piccadilly line train going through a tunnel next to it. The horse's breathing was steady and controlled now, but Marcus could tell that he was tense by the way he was standing. This wasn't the way the Horse Guards parade stood for a ceremony. This was the state of readiness of a soldier who knew the enemy was still out there and still dangerous. The blue light from Marcus's phone screen made strange shadows on the walls of the tunnel. There was no signal down here, which was probably for the best. Rebecca's people could keep an eye on phones, listen in on conversations, and read messages. The enemy had turned the very technology that was supposed to protect them into another weapon. "You know what the worst part is?" Marcus said, needing to say what he was thinking even though Storm couldn't answer. "Everyone thinks you're done. You're a has-been who couldn't handle the pressure and got sent to tourist duty." He reached out and stroked Storm's neck, feeling the strong muscles under the coat. "But you're still fighting, right? You're still keeping people safe, even when they don't know they need it." Storm turned his head toward Marcus, and their smart dark eyes met in the dim light. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Storm moved closer and gently nuzzled Marcus's shoulder. This was so human in its kindness that it almost made the young soldier lose his composure completely. At that moment, Marcus learned something important about his partner. Storm wasn't doing ceremonial duty as a punishment or because he was broken. He had been put there as a guardian, a quiet watcher over the heart of British power and tradition. The Shadow Protocol training hadn't been taken away, it had just been changed into a different kind of mission. "They think you're just a pretty horse standing still for pictures," Marcus said in a soft voice. "But you chose me, didn't you? When they put us together 6 months ago, you could have been assigned to anyone. But you chose the working-class kid from East London whose mom is dying of cancer and who needed this job to pay the medical bills." Storm pressed his forehead against Marcus's chest, a sign of trust and partnership that went beyond species. The horse's breathing matched Marcus's, and for the first time since his father's death, he felt completely sure that he wasn't alone. "Okay, boy," Marcus said, his voice getting stronger and more determined. "We'll have to stop this ourselves if we can't trust the system. Trooping the Colour is tomorrow morning, and hundreds of thousands of people, including the whole royal family, will be there. Rebecca is going to try to kill them all, and we're the only ones who know about it." He stood up and put his hand on Storm's neck, feeling the horse's steady heartbeat under his palm. "Your unit in Shadow Protocol died to protect innocent people. Lieutenant Mitchell, those agents in Paris gave their lives so that others could live. Tomorrow, we finish what they started." Storm raised his head, and his ears perked up with new purpose. The PTSD, the trauma, and the painful memories was still there and would probably always be there. But they wouldn't be able to define him anymore. He was still a soldier, a protector, and a guardian of the innocent. Marcus and Storm both tensed when they heard footsteps coming from the tunnel. But it was just a maintenance worker with a flashlight who said hello and then disappeared down another hallway. For now, they were safe, but morning was coming, and with it, the most important mission of their lives. The weather on Saturday morning in London was clear and cool. It was the kind of day that makes the Union Jack snap proudly in the wind and brings out the best in British pageantry. By 7 in the morning, thousands of people were already lined up along the Mall, wrapped in blankets and holding thermos flasks of hot tea. Their breath was visible in small puffs against the cool air. The air was full of excitement as children sat on their fathers' shoulders, old veterans wore their medals with quiet pride, and tourists from all over the world came to see one of Britain's most amazing shows. The colour trooping. The ceremony honoured the Queen's official birthday with a show of military precision that had been the same for hundreds of years. Today, the whole royal family would meet on the reviewing platform, where they would be open and vulnerable in a way that only happened once a year. Marcus Webb and Storm were standing together in the staging area behind Buckingham Palace. They were both technically off duty, but Colonel Hughes had quietly arranged for them to be backup security. Marcus's hands shook a little as he adjusted Storm's ceremonial bridle. It wasn't because he was cold, it was because he felt the weight of knowledge pressing down on him like a physical force. Rebecca Cross was making her way through the crowd of thousands with a device that could end the British monarchy in one terrible moment. "Easy, boy," Marcus whispered, not sure if he was trying to calm Storm down or himself. "We know she's out there. We just have to find her before." Storm's ears turned forward, and he scanned the huge crowd with the same intensity as radar. His nostrils opened wide, taking in thousands of smells, including perfumes, breakfast pastries, wool coats, nervous sweat, and something else. Something that made every muscle in his strong body tense up with recognition. The faint but clear chemical signature of military-grade explosives. As the Household Cavalry moved into formation, the sound of their horses' hooves hitting the ground echoed off the old stones of Horse Guards Parade. Marcus looked through binoculars as the royal family got ready to watch the parade. The Queen wore a bright coat and matching hat, Prince William and Kate were with their kids, and Prince Charles looked smart in his military uniform. They were perfect targets because they were high up and not moving, just like Rebecca wanted. Before Marcus knew what was going on, Storm had already started to move. The horse's breathing had changed to the controlled pattern of being ready for battle. As he moved through the crowd of ceremonial horses and guards, his steps became precise and purposeful. This wasn't the slow movement of an old animal, it was the focused advance of a soldier who had seen an enemy. "What is it?" Marcus asked, but he already knew. Storm's body was stiff all over, just like it had been outside the warehouse and when Rebecca Cross first came up to them at Horse Guards Parade. The horse's dark eyes were fixed on the press area, where journalists and photographers were gathered behind barriers, their cameras and microphones making a forest. Rebecca Cross stood in the third row from the front. Her press credentials were hanging around her neck, and they looked completely real and legitimate. Her expensive camera gear looked like it belonged to a professional and wasn't dangerous. But Marcus could see things that the security teams couldn't, like the small changes she made to her gear, the extra weight in her photographer's bag, and the way her fingers moved with the practiced precision of someone getting ready to set a timer. Storm's breathing got fast and shallow, which Marcus had learned was a sign of PTSD. But this time, the horse fought through the memories of Paris, the pain of losing Lieutenant Mitchell, and the trauma of blood and explosions. His duty was stronger than the pain he was in. The royal carriage slowly made its way to the reviewing platform, with each horse's step, bringing the monarchy closer to Rebecca's killing zone. Marcus felt Storm get ready beneath him, his muscles coiling like springs ready to spring into action. In 30 seconds, the royal family would be in the right place. Rebecca would reach for the detonator in her camera bag in 25 seconds. Storm's nostrils flared one last time, confirming what both the soldier and the horse already knew for sure. The bomb was there, the target was getting closer, and they were the only ones who could stop it. Time was running out. As the royal carriage turned the corner onto the mall, its beautiful horses stepped in perfect time with each other, and thousands of people cheered. Prince William and Catherine waved from the reviewing platform, and the Queen sat inside, where her bright yellow coat and matching hat were clearly visible through the crystal-clear windows. Rebecca Cross had planned for the whole royal family to be in the right place, and they were. Rebecca reached into her camera bag with practiced precision, 50 yards away, hidden among the press photographers. Her fingers found the detonator, which was hidden in a camera battery pack. The digital display showed that it had been 30 seconds and was still counting. Everything was going great. The device was set up for maximum effect, the royal family was still and exposed, and security was only looking at the outside, completely unaware of the threat that was hiding in plain sight among real journalists. But Storm had found her. The beautiful black horse's nostrils flared wide as he confirmed what his shadow protocol training had taught him to recognize, the unmistakable chemical signature of military-grade, Semtex explosive. His dark eyes were locked on Rebecca's position with laser-like intensity. Every muscle in his strong body was tense and ready to spring into action. Marcus could feel the change right away. "Storm, what is it?" he whispered, but he already knew. His partner's breathing had changed into that familiar combat pattern, the same steady rhythm he'd learned to recognize over the months they had been together. 25 seconds. Rebecca's thumb was hovering over the activation button, and her face was calm and professional, even though her heart was racing. This moment had been planned for 3 years, infiltrated for months, and cost millions of dollars to prepare for. The British monarchy would fall today, and the effects would change European politics forever. 20 seconds. Storm made up his mind. The warhorse charged through the crowd with a sound like thunder, and his iron hooves struck sparks from the old cobblestones. People ran away in a panic, and parents grabbed their kids and ran to safety. As chaos broke out in the middle of London's most sacred ceremony, security officers turned around in confusion, their radios buzzing with urgent messages. Marcus yelled "Bomb!" at the top of his lungs, and his voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Press section. Bomb. 800 pounds of trained military horses came down on Rebecca's position, and her eyes widened in shock and anger. She stabbed the detonator over and over again, but Storm's shoulder hit her square in the chest, sending her and the device flying in different directions. 15 seconds. The detonator skittered across the cobblestones, and its display kept counting down with perfect mechanical accuracy. Rebecca rolled and reached for the device, but Marcus jumped off Storm's back and tackled her before she could finish her mission. They fell to the ground hard, fighting for control while tourists screamed and security forces finally figured out what was going on. Rebecca was stronger than she looked. Her BBC style hid the muscles she had trained for this kind of fight. Her elbow hit Marcus in the ribs, knocking the air out of his lungs, but he held on with all his might. 10 seconds. Storm stood right in front of the bomb and the royal carriage, using his huge body as a shield. Through the window of the carriage, his dark eyes met the Queen's. For a brief moment, they both knew who the other was. She knew what was going on and what he was giving up. Her small nod carried the weight of hundreds of years of British bravery. 5 seconds. Storm, no, Marcus yelled as he fought with Rebecca, but the horse didn't move. This was the moment that Shadow Protocol training had prepared him for, when duty called for the ultimate sacrifice. The bomb squad ran to the device as fast as they could, their heavy equipment making noise as they did. The lead technician knelt down next to the detonator and quickly moved his trained fingers over the controls as the digital display counted down from 3 to 2 to 1. The device stopped making noise. Disarmed. The technician yelled, his voice hoarse with joy. Device is safe. All clear. The cheers from the crowd were so loud that they echoed off the old buildings around Horse Guards Parade. They were full of relief and thanks. Storm stayed still for another heartbeat, his warrior instincts telling him that the danger had really passed. Then, when the adrenaline wore off, he finally let his legs bend a little. Marcus looked up from where he had finally pinned Rebecca to the ground, her wrists tied with police restraints. He saw his partner standing like a statue in the afternoon sun. The thin black ribbon in Storm's mane caught the light. It was no longer a sign of forgotten service, it was a sign of active heroism. The plot was stopped, the royal family was safe, and a horse that everyone had called a living toy had shown that he was exactly what he had always been, a guardian, a protector, and a true soldier who never forgot his duty. The day after trooping the colour, the weather was typical for London, grey and drizzly. It seemed to wash the city clean after the chaos of the day before. But this wasn't just any other morning after a royal event. News vans lined Whitehall, their satellite dishes pointing up to the sky like mechanical flowers reaching for the sun. Reporters held steaming cups of coffee and got ready for what would turn out to be one of the most amazing press conferences in British military history. At the Ministry of Defence, Colonel James Hughes stood behind the podium. His weathered face showed the weight of decades of classified information that was about to be made public for the first time. A big screen behind him showed two pictures side by side, one of Storm in his ceremonial tack at Horse Guards Parade and the other from Paris 2019, showing the same beautiful horse in tactical gear with a thin black ribbon in his mane that had finally been recognized for what it really was. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hughes began, his Scottish accent clear in the crowded briefing room. "Yesterday, this country saw something amazing. Not only did we stop a terrorist attack on our royal family, but we also found a hero who has been hiding in plain sight for 5 years." The journalists who were there leaned in, and their cameras clicked and their recording devices hummed. Jake Morrison sat in the front row with his phone off for once. His usual smug smile was replaced by something that looked like shame. The young influencer had spent the whole night taking down his videos that made fun of people and posting apologies to his 2.3 million followers. But by then, the damage to his reputation had already spread like wildfire on social media. Shadow Protocol, Hughes went on, was Britain's most secret military animal intelligence program. It was disbanded after a tragic operation in Paris, but these animals did great work in counter-terrorism operations all over Europe. Storm, the horse you see here, is one of the last operatives from that program still alive. Through the big windows of the briefing room, you could see Marcus Webb standing next to Storm in the courtyard outside. The young soldier's uniform was spotless now, and the brass buttons shone in the soft morning light. But he had a new sense of confidence in his eyes that he hadn't had before. He wasn't just a ceremonial guard anymore, he was the partner of a living legend. Hughes said, the terrorist cell led by Rebecca Cross had been planning this attack for 3 years. His voice was heavy with the weight of what might have happened. They got into our media, our security services, and even our intelligence networks. But they made one big mistake. They didn't realize how strong the bond is between a soldier and his partner. Storm stood perfectly still in the courtyard, but his ears kept moving, always alert and watching. The thin black ribbon woven into his mane caught the light. It was no longer a secret sign of forgotten service, it was now a badge of honor that everyone could see and understand. A reporter for the BBC raised her hand. "Colonel, what's going to happen to Storm now? Will he still be on ceremonial duty?" The first real sign of happiness anyone had seen from Hughes in years was his smile. Storm will be moved to a specialized horse security unit with Trooper Webb. Their partnership has been very helpful, and to be honest, after what happened yesterday, I wouldn't dream of separating them. Storm raised his beautiful head toward the grey London sky and made a sound that was part whinny and part declaration of victory, as if he knew how important this moment was. The sound bounced off the old stones of Whitehall, bringing with it the voices of every silent hero who had ever served without being recognized and every guardian who had protected the innocent without wanting fame. Jake Morrison slowly stood up and moved toward the microphone that Hughes held out to him. "I want to say something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong. Completely, totally wrong. I thought a horse standing still was just decoration. I thought a soldier doing his duty was just a prop. I judged them by what I could see on the surface, and I missed everything that really mattered." As he went on, his voice got stronger. "Storm isn't just a horse. He's a hero. Marcus isn't just a guard. He's a partner to someone who risked everything to protect people he'll never meet. I made fun of them for millions of people to see, and I'm ashamed of that. But maybe that shame can teach us all something important. Don't judge people by what you see on the outside. The most important things are usually invisible." The press conference went on for another hour, during which Hughes carefully revealed information about Shadow Protocol operations and Storm's impressive service record. But Marcus and Storm had already moved on to their next mission outside in the courtyard, standing watch, protecting the innocent, and serving with quiet dignity in a world that finally understood how valuable they were. The truth had come out, honor had been restored, and a partnership that had been formed in a time of crisis was ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. It had been 3 weeks since that crazy morning at Trooping the Color, but Horse Guards Parade felt like a whole new world. The same old cobblestones were still under the same ceremonial arches, and the same tourists were still there with their cameras and curious eyes. But everything had changed in ways that were both small and big. The quiet talks were different now, they were full of respect instead of mockery, and the questions people asked showed real interest instead of just brushing them off. Marcus Webb stood at attention in his freshly pressed crimson tunic. The brass buttons on his tunic caught the afternoon sun like little mirrors. Storm stood next to him in his ceremonial pose, like a soldier who had finally been recognized for who he really was. The thin black ribbon in his mane was no longer a secret sign of service that people had forgotten about. Now, everyone who came to London understood and respected it as a badge of honor. A group of American tourists came up, their kids holding small Union Jack flags and books about British history. The teenage daughter of the family took out her phone, but instead of the mocking livestream that Jake Morrison had done weeks before, she started recording with real respect. "This is Storm," she said to her camera in a whisper, her voice full of awe. "He's the horse that protected the royal family from a terrorist attack. He was a real war hero, who worked for a secret military unit called Shadow Protocol. Can you believe we are actually seeing him in person?" Her younger brother, who was probably 10 years old, stepped closer to Storm with big eyes. "Daddy, is it true that he can smell bombs? Is he really a soldier like the ones in the movies?" Their dad, a middle-aged man with a veteran's cap on his head, was a former U.S. Navy officer. Navy nodded in a way that only someone who has served in the military would understand. "Son, this horse has been in battles that most people can't even imagine. He has saved lives, protected innocent people, and served his country with honor. You are looking at a hero when you look at him." Storm turned his ears toward the conversation, and for a brief moment, his dark eyes met those of the American veteran. In that short moment of connection, warriors recognized each other. They understood that service can take many forms, that courage isn't limited to human hearts, and that sometimes the best heroes are the ones who serve without expecting recognition. Marcus noticed that Storm's posture changed slightly and that his partner's breathing became deeper and more relaxed. Storm had been carrying the weight of invisible wounds for months, the trauma of Paris and the pain of being seen as nothing more than a pretty decoration for tourists to take pictures of. But now, with real respect and understanding all around them, those wounds were finally starting to heal. A British girl, maybe 8 years old, pulled on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, can I give him something? I made this at school when we learned about Storm in history class." She held up a small drawing that was clearly made with colored pencils and with the care that kids put into their most important projects. The words "Thank you for keeping us safe" were written in neat block letters across the bottom of the picture, which showed Storm standing tall and proud. Her mom smiled and walked over to Marcus. "Officer, could my daughter give this to Storm? She's been talking about him non-stop since the news broke." Marcus looked down at the little girl and then at the drawing, which meant more to him than any military medal. "Of course," he said in a soft voice. "But you need to be very careful. Storm is still a soldier on duty." The child came up with the same kind of awe and respect that kids have when they meet their heroes. She held up the drawing so Storm could see it. The beautiful horse lowered his head a little, and his warm breath on the paper made it seem like he was studying every crayon stroke. "Thanks, Storm," the girl said in a low voice. "My teacher says you're really brave." As the family moved on, more people came to visit, and they all showed the kind of respect that had been missing just a few weeks before. A group of British schoolchildren on a field trip listened closely as their teacher talked about Shadow Protocol and Storm's service record. Older veterans stopped to quietly salute a soldier who had 4 legs instead of 2. Jake Morrison was at the edge of the crowd, but he was a different person. The arrogant influencer who had made fun of Storm and Marcus for fun was no longer there. He kept his phone in his pocket, and his approach was slow and almost apologetic. He had lost almost 500,000 followers after he apologized in public, but the look in his eyes made it seem like he thought it was worth it to learn what really mattered. "Officer Webb." Jake's voice was shaky and not as confident as it had been before. "I just wanted to say again how sorry I am. I've been volunteering at a horse therapy program for veterans since everything happened. I'm trying to make up for what I did." Marcus looked at the young man's face and saw real regret where there had once been pride. "Storm's the one you should say sorry to," he said simply. Jake stepped closer and looked Storm right in the eye. He said softly, "I'm sorry. I judged you by what I could see on the surface, and I missed everything that really mattered. You're a hero, and I was too blind to see it." Storm's response was quiet but clear. He nodded his big head slightly, like a soldier who had learned an important lesson and was accepting an apology. As the sun began to set over London in the afternoon, casting long shadows over the parade ground, Marcus thought about how much had changed. Storm was no longer a forgotten soldier stuck doing tourist work. He was exactly what he had always been, a guardian, a protector, and a hero who served with quiet dignity in a world that finally saw how valuable he was. As the changing of the guard ceremony began, Storm fell into step with the precision of a soldier who had found his purpose again. The sound of each hoofbeat on the old stones was like a declaration of honor restored, duty fulfilled, and service recognized. As they marched, Marcus whispered, "You know, I think this is just the beginning for us, boy. There are other threats out there, other people who need protecting. And now the world knows exactly what we can do." Storm's ears perked up with new purpose, and he walked steadily and strongly. He would always have PTSD, and the memories of Paris would never fully go away, but they no longer defined him. He was Storm of Shadow Protocol, Marcus Webb's partner, the realm's protector, and the guardian of the innocent. As tourists watched with new respect and understanding, as children waved their drawings and veterans saluted, Storm stood tall in the twilight of London. Not just a horse for show anymore. Not forgotten or ignored anymore. He was still the same hero he had always been, he had just been waiting for the world to catch up. The best heroes don't always have to tell you they're heroes. They just stand there, do their job, and protect people who can't protect themselves. And when the time comes to test their courage, they face it with the calm strength that real warriors have in their hearts. Storm's story reminds us that looks can be deceiving, that noise and show don't tell how much something is worth, and that the best protectors are often the ones we don't see until we really need them. Honor has been restored. Duty recognized. Hero revealed. This was only the start of their story.